with Bankcard Toolbox. It is great to have you on the call today. I am really excited about the webinar we've got lined up for you, 5 Essentials for Effective Leadership. This is part of the Bankcard Toolbox Speaker Series that I've launched for 2013. And I really wanted to do something a little bit different this time. Instead of focusing on sales-related content, I really wanted to have someone present to us that had a lot of insight on what those key characteristics are of successful organizations and leaders. So we have a really good lineup. I've reviewed the presentation, and I'm really excited about what we have for you. If you get a chance, please go over and like my new Facebook page. It's www.fb.com/BankcardToolbox, and I'll be announcing a lot of the additional webinars and free trainings and some of the information that we'll have coming out to you in the future. Just a couple housekeeping items before we get going today. I just want to let everyone know this will be in lecture mode. We've got too many people on the call to really open it up for questions. We'll get a lot of feedback. I know we have a lot of people that typically might be in their car listening on their phone and not on the webinar, so we're going to go ahead and just do lecture-only mode today. And I will put this replay up for public viewing for a period of 7 days, and you'll receive an email tomorrow. It'll have the YouTube link over on my YouTube channel, and you can go out and look at the replay, share it with your coworkers, and feel free to repeat if you feel you need to. And it will come down after 7 days, and then Bankcard Toolbox members will have access to this as they do all our webinars and trainings and replays for the life of their membership. So housekeeping's done. Let's get going here. I'm really excited. We have Neil Eady with us today that's going to present on the 5 essentials for effective leadership. Let me tell you a little bit about Neil. He's a speaker, lecturer, consultant, and founder of Life IQ, where he motivates groups and individuals to work, play, relate, and live intelligently, something we all need to do. He's had the opportunity to work with numerous managers, directors, corporate leaders, and teams, and he helps them focus and improve their personal and professional effectiveness. Neil has worked with a host of Fortune 500 companies, including Walmart, PepsiCo, Merrill Lynch, Pearson, and Gannett, among some of the top groups he's worked with. He's also had the opportunity to consult internationally with clients in over a dozen countries. He's co-author of the book, When Would Now Be a Good Time?, and was a recent personality consultant to Women's World magazine. He has a BA in psychology, a BA in sociology, and a master's degree in counseling. And Neil and his wife, Deb, have 2 children and live in Appleton, Wisconsin. So we are going to go ahead and turn the controls over here to Neil, and we will get going here. Neil, how you doing today?
Very good. Thank you, Mark, and thank you so much for having me on this webinar. And thank you for that introduction. I have had an opportunity to work with leaders in a variety of industries. In fact, early in my career, I was in the healthcare industry, and I helped develop a management education series and got to know a lot of leaders, got to know a lot of managers, got to see the things that worked well and the things that didn't work so well. And as you know, and those on the line know, it is all about leadership. It always comes back to leadership. You can have fantastic employees, but if you don't have effective leadership in place, if you have ineffective leaders, your employees are going to be disillusioned. They're going to become disengaged, and it really doesn't matter what kind of an organization you have after that. So it really comes back to great leaders. In fact, I had conversations with 2 different employees just this past week. One individual was telling me about a recent performance review that she had with her manager, and this gal is a solid contributor. She does a great job. Her performance review went well. Her manager was rating her on a variety of different areas on a scale of 1 to 5, and and she was getting 4s and 4s and 4s. In fact, one category that said something about attendance or promptness or some of those kind of things, she missed work one time in the past year, and that was an excused sick day. And she said, well, why didn't I get a 5 out of 5 on that? And he said, you know, I don't want to give 5s out because then, you know, my employees will stop trying so hard. In fact, he confided to her that he doesn't give out any 5s. And I was talking to this employee going, is that motivational for you? Is that knowing that your best work is never going to be good enough, why even try for a 5? And it just baffles me when I hear about those kind of conversations. Another employee was in an organization where they had some just archaic attendance policies. And this was a coworker talking about one of her colleagues who had just been recently let go. I mean, this individual had some family emergency kind of things come up, and so he missed a little bit of work in there. But this guy was a high flyer. He was a shining star. He would train other employees. He was just a joy spreader. And hopefully you know some joy spreaders, but this individual was a joy spreader. And because of he missed too many days in one quarter, they let him go. And I think about how short-sighted that is. So when I'm going to talk to you about the 5 essentials of effective leaders in a short amount of time today. We're going to kind of fly through this material. So be ready to jot down some notes and scribble along here as we go through this. The first thing that we're going to be talking about with the 5 essentials of effective leaders, we're going to talk about self. And we're going to spend actually quite a bit of time on this one alone because this alone will set up everything else. We're going to break down self into 3 categories, and the first one is self-awareness. As most of you know, emotional intelligence, you have to have it in leadership. And the cornerstone of emotional intelligence is self-awareness. In fact, studies tell us that only 20% of the people in any given organization are emotionally intelligent. And that's a pretty scary statistic to think about, that if that's the cornerstone of emotional intelligence, only 1/5 of the people that you work with may have it. And you have to have it in leadership. You have to know yourself inside and out. The thing is, and when I work with audiences, I talk about them, you know, I may know more about you in the first 5 minutes of interacting with you than you may know about yourself. First impressions are everything, and there's a primacy effect that goes on with that, where we want to kind of figure out, our brains are kind of lazy, and so when we meet someone, we want to make a judgment, we want to form a theory about that person, and then we want to kind of cement that down. We don't want to change that theory a whole lot. So for new leaders and new managers, I talk about how critical those first days, those first couple weeks are, because your employees want to know if you're going to be effective, and they're going to make that judgment within a matter of days. So your first impressions, the first meetings, the first initiatives, all those kind of things, there's going to be a lot of eyeballs on you figuring out whether or not they're going to follow your lead, and if you're worth the money that they're paying you to do this kind of job. So first impressions is very important. In fact, I love this phenomenon in our culture that's been going on for the last decade or so, saying, you know what, we don't even need to go to a dinner and a movie anymore. Let's just sit down and talk with each other in 5 to 6 minutes. And that's what speed dating is about. In 5 to 6 minutes, these people are saying, yeah, I don't know if this is someone that I really want to get to know or not. And then they can check them off the list and kind of keep going. There's a couple of fascinating studies that they've done on our self-awareness and how poor we are at being self-aware, self-evaluators. There's a great one involving a weatherman's IQ. And so what they did in this situation, they had a participant in the study sit at a table, sitting in a chair, and an individual comes in that is given a weather report. About a minute, they go through the weather forecast, and they just read it from the script, and then they leave the room, and they ask the person sitting there who heard the weather report about the person's IQ. And the participant is like, well, how would I know the person's IQ? That was just 1 minute. I have no idea. Then they would also ask the weatherman, quote-unquote weatherman, what he or she thought their IQ was as well. And what they found is that the person who heard the weather report and didn't know this person at all, but in 1 minute, they were 66% more accurate about that individual's IQ than the actual individual themselves. So what does that say about us? We're lousy self-evaluators. We're not very good about this, and we need to know this. Another study said, college students, they were better predictors of the longevity of their roommate's relationship than the roommate was of themselves. And if you think about that, that kind of makes sense. There's kind of a detached view of people that we've known in our lives that we go, yeah, that's just not going to work out real well. But those who are in it are too close to see it themselves. But it is still imperative. We have to get over this bias a bit of thinking that we're better than we are in some respects, and be critical self-evaluators of our strengths and weaknesses. So we need to ask ourselves lots of questions, and we could spend a lot of time here talking about how to build up your self-awareness. But one of the ways to do it is asking ourselves introspective questions. Who am I? What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? What are my natural gifts and talents? What do I enjoy doing? What are my passions? What are my preferences? What kind of personality do I have? What kind of goals? What do I want out of life? All these questions, if you ask yourself this, will increase your self-awareness and put you in positions to be more effective in your personal and professional lives. And if you don't know some of these things, ask people around you. Ask these questions and get some feedback on that. There's one other question that you need to ask yourself, and I hesitate to ask this because it's a little rude, and you may not have considered it before, but it has to be asked. You have to ask yourself, am I annoying? And again, not seeing you, not interacting with you on this call, my guess is, yeah, you probably are. And the fact is, we all are. We all are annoying on some level. And the reason why I know that is because I do a lot of work with personalities. I am a master practitioner in the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, which is kind of the gold standard for personality tests out there. And so when I go through that, in fact, when I'm dealing with any kind of new manager or new leader, I go here first. I have them complete a personality test, so at least we have a baseline. That helps in their self-awareness as well to understand their personality. What are some of their natural preferences? So, for example, you just being you will end up being annoying to someone who has an opposite preference than you. For example, extroverts and introverts. Extroverts, they get their energy from thinking out loud and talking and interacting with others, and they enjoy activity. Introverts are the opposite. It's not that they don't enjoy people. They can have great people skills, but they get their energy from having some downtime. In Cubeville, in some cubicles, they may have some headphones on to help them concentrate and kind of block out some of the noise. If they have an office, they may shut that door just so they can have some peace and quiet and really concentrate. So if an extrovert bops by and opens the door and say, hey, how you doing today, Marcia? What's going on here? What are you working on? The extrovert will say, well, I'm simply being friendly here. And the introvert, if you would ask them, say, well, no, you're being rude and you're interrupting me when I'm really in the flow of getting some things done. Extrovert wouldn't have any idea that would come across as annoying. But as you understand your personality, as you understand your preferences, you can tailor those to the different situations that you come across. So in increasing your self-awareness, absolutely, Myers-Briggs, that's my other website, that's my personality website out there. If you haven't gone through a 360 evaluation, I would highly recommend that as well. That can be a pretty gut-wrenching process when you're getting feedback from not only your manager or your director, but from everyone around you. And if you've ever been through it, you understand that that's a fear-inducing process when you're reading some of the negative feedback that you're getting. And anytime I've ever seen it administered, they go over again saying, there is tons of positive things here. Look for the positives, but still be teachable. But our tendency is to go straight to the negative and try to figure out who wrote this about us and all those kind of things. But it was extremely valuable when I went through that process with the Stephen Covey training that I went through. But I would highly recommend that your self-awareness will grow through that process. So why is it important for leaders to understand themselves? You know, it's better to understand and own your weaknesses and shortcomings than to have other people talk about them. If you think about some of those marginal managers that you've had in the past, the conversations that you had with coworkers about those individuals, well, guess what? Those conversations are happening about you. And if you understand, you know what, there's going to be times that I walk into the office and I'm just so focused on what I need to do for that day, there's going to be times that I forget to say good morning, or I may forget a birthday or two. Help me out. Just admit that right off the bat. Staff, help me out with that, because it's not one of my strengths. And so I'm asking for some grace right off the bat, because I need to work on that area a little bit. So it's better to understand and own those weaknesses and shortcomings than to have other people talk about them, and you can understand them and own them once you know that about yourself through self-awareness. Fantastic book. I'm a big reader. I'm a huge Marc Buckingham fan. And in his great book called The One Thing You Need to Know About Individual Success is discover what you don't like doing and stop doing it. Well, that sounds really great there, Marc Buckingham. All of us have to do things that we don't like to do sometimes, and he admits that it is a bit idealistic, but the reality is, and he's a British individual, so he really picks on us Yankees over here in our Western culture, just saying we're so obsessed with those areas of opportunity. He said, apply that same energy to what you love to do, what some of your strengths are, and you're going to get more of a bang for your buck out of that. So again, something to keep in mind. Once you understand your strengths and weaknesses, you can maybe put more attention on your strengths once you figure that out. Self-awareness gives one the opportunity to be proactive with one's strengths, preferences, and optimal environments. I was alluding to that earlier. This has to be in place before I can start to capitalize on my strengths and preferences and optimal environments. I'll give a quick example. Early in my career, I had to do some cold calling for an employee assistance program that I was working for, and I was in an open space, and it really made me uncomfortable because my personality is not naturally bent towards sales, and so I would stumble and hem and haw, and it felt very exposed and vulnerable because this was a skill that I didn't have. So I approached my manager. I recognized those feelings that I had, and I approached my manager and said, you know, Steve, would it be okay if I just close the door every once in a while, or I went into that back office and closed the door and make these calls, because I don't think I'm doing a very good job and I want to improve, but I'm feeling quite a bit of anxiety just feeling like everyone's watching this performance. And he said, absolutely, go do that. And I got better at it, but I took away that one factor, at least one of the intimidating, anxiety-producing factors of it, so I could concentrate on what I needed to do on the call, and I wasn't thinking about what others were thinking about me in that situation. Self-aware individuals are much more in tune with what they're feeling and the origin of those feelings. That gets to the root of emotional intelligence, understanding when we're feeling anxious or scared or worried or annoyed or irritated. And again, as a leader, your employees are going to mirror your emotions and your mood. So if someone cuts you off on the way to work and you're kind of upset about that, you got to check those emotions. You got to recognize them, arrest them, and then check those emotions at the door, because your mood is going to be contagious. And effective leaders understand that, and they're able to speak to their emotional intelligence. Now, my kids are 9 and 11 now, but ever since they were, 3, 4 years old, part of the routine at meals or at bedtime is talking through the emotions during the day. At first, we would call them mad, sads, and glads. When were you mad today? When were you sad today? When were you glad today? Which mood did you feel more? Just helping that emotional recognition as they grow up. And then we started getting into more sophisticated, nuanced emotions like being embarrassed or being anxious or being shy or some of those kind of things. Self-aware individuals understand their needs and how to get those needs met. Now let's go back to Psych 101 here with Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and it's a rare presentation that I don't bring up Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And leaders, emotionally intelligent leaders, self-aware leaders, understand where their needs get met. And the big one here is this belongingness and love needs. I'm not too worried about, food, clothes, shelter. Is there some sort of routine? Do you have insurance? Is there basically some of the safety needs goes, do you have an infrastructure in place that you're not feeling stress and anxiety all the time? Do you have some sort of organizational infrastructure in place? But when we get to this belongingness and love needs, all of us have a need to be understood and accepted. But for managers and leaders, those needs cannot be met through the employees that they are supervising, or they can't make their decisions whether or not their popularity is going to take a hit. The rub with leadership and with people who are in management is that more times than not, they need to side with what the organization is doing. They need to be the voice for organizational initiatives. And so especially frontline managers that are dealing with employees that are affected by these changes, they have to kind of straddle that line a little bit. But they have to keep the organizational needs in the forefront. And so if they don't have that belongingness and love needs, if they don't have a support system, if they don't have a circle of people outside of work, or even some mentorships or some colleagues on their same kind of level, manager, director level, that they can talk to and kind of debrief some of these kind of things, that could skew their decision-making process. So once again, we have to be self-aware on where we get these needs met. Otherwise, our motivations can get sideways when we're in management and leadership. And I think most of you can come up with some examples that you've seen where decisions are made based on getting some of these other needs met. We have to be aware of our biases. People in management and leadership have to be aware of our biases because we like people like us. And if we aren't aware of that, that unawareness can have some huge ramifications. People with opposite preferences threaten and annoy us because they have strengths in our areas of weakness. And I think about one individual that I worked with, and we ended up having a very good relationship, but on the personality scale, we were on opposite ends. She was a sensor. She was very detail-oriented, very present-oriented, process-oriented. I'm a big-picture guy. I get bogged down with those details. I don't know how to even look for some of those details, and quite frankly, I don't care about some of those details. So I was in charge of a project. My colleague Heather took over that project, and then she started to ask me questions. And I didn't know, and I didn't care about those answers, but I really had to say, her objective right now is not to be annoying to me. She is simply trying to get information. And so I said, Heather, this is not something I do well. I don't know how to find this information. How would you go about it? I want to be helpful to you. How can I go about doing this for you? And we really built a nice symbiotic relationship there because I needed someone to help flesh out some details of my pie-in-the-sky thinking, and she needed some originality and some big-picture thinking for some of her projects as well. But as we'll see in a little bit, one piece has to be in place before we can do that effectively. A lot of managers I talk to, they will deny that they have any favorites, so I rephrase the question. I say, well, who are some of your best employees? And then that kind of gets to the heart of it a little bit. They start talking about some of the people that they really like, and then I'll lead them into a conversation going, based on your personality type and based on your description of these people that you're talking about, boy, you seem to have similar personalities. Do you think that there's anything behind that? And it just helps them become aware of their biases. I worked with one director who believed that she had an underperforming manager. She was asking for feedback and details and constantly looking for more structure, and she didn't seem to move projects forward. Well, I had to point out to this director that she was a macro manager. That's how she enjoyed being managed, was very a hands-off approach. So that's how, in turn, she managed others, was a very macro-level, hands-off approach. And this manager needed a hands-on approach. And it wasn't that she was ineffective. It was that she had a totally different style and preference in how she took in information. And so once I had a conversation with both of them on how to work effectively, it totally changed her view of that manager, and she no longer saw her as a struggling, underperforming. She realized, I need to figure out ways to communicate the details of this project that can help assist her in her development. So just being aware of our biases and understand that we like people like us. Insecure leaders don't get those who are like them, but on a much deeper and more personal level, they don't feel like those employees get them. And ultimately, all of us want to be known and understood. So it could be kind of some insecurity coming back going, well, they don't seem to appreciate me, or they don't seem to understand where I'm coming from. Self-awareness can make you aware of those biases. Insecurity and leadership are a bad combination. Why? Well, that's pretty obvious. If I am working for an insecure leader, and maybe some of you have had that experience, I spend a lot of my conversations and a lot of my time making sure I'm building them up. And spending time building up my manager's confidence, that's not part of my job. So insecure leaders are constantly looking for self-justification, ways to make sure that they puff themselves up, that they make themselves look valuable. All right, we spent a lot of time on self-awareness. We're going to talk about self-regulation. We're talking about three things here under self-awareness, self-regulation. And again, we talked about that. We're going to spend quite a bit of time up front here, and then the other four are going to go quicker. Self-regulation is the ability to delay gratification and regulate one's emotions and impulses. Why would self-regulation be important for an effective leader? Well, as we talked about, there's going to be some managers and leaders have to take the high road. They just do, and so they have to keep their emotions in check. They have to understand when they're feeling kind of anger or irritation with employees. They have to think through everything that they're going to say. They have to treat their employees like the press sometimes, and they have to think through the press releases, quote-unquote press releases, that they state or put in emails, because that's important. Now, there's an awesome way that they measure the self-regulation, and if we had time, I would show you a couple videos here. But back in the 1960s, they said, you know what, this self-regulation, this ability to delay gratification, this is a big deal. In fact, we think it's a better predictor of success than IQ alone. And so what they do, they took these 4-year-olds and they put them in a room and they put a marshmallow in front of them and said, okay, 4-year-old, see this marshmallow? You can have it. It's yours. But here's a catch. I'm going to leave this room and I'm going to come back here in 15 minutes, and if that marshmallow is still there, you get another marshmallow. You get a total of 2 marshmallows. Well, this is quite the predicament for a 4-year-old. And so they would videotape these kids, and they would cover their eyes, and they would sing, and they would try to distract themselves. But what they did longitudinal studies on these 4-year-olds that were able to delay the gratification, and they did find that they were more successful than those who couldn't do that in their relationships, in their overall happiness, in their success, in their personal and professional life. Now, how does that play out in the business world? Well, I've got a friend whose personality is pretty analytical. He's not a real feeler kind of guy, and so when he had an employee come in and was crying and talking about that her cat just passed away, he's really kind of an anal retentive guy, very organized. And he said, Neil, if I'm honest, the very first thought that popped in my head, the very first question I wanted to ask, or the statement that I wanted to say is, well, you could probably take cat food and kitty litter off your Excel spreadsheet budget. You know, you can take those line items off there because the cat's dead, and, you know, now you don't have to pay for things every month. Boy, I'm really interested in how that affects the bottom line. Now, he would say it's probably not an appropriate thing to say. He understands that about himself because he's self-aware enough. So he has to reach back in that feeling part of his brain and say, you know what, I'm sorry to hear about your cat. And even though it is a little odd, in other circumstances, he may have just blurted that out, but he now knows self-regulation. That's probably not the right question to ask right here, and he was able to put that in place. All right, I'm going to skip through some of this stuff for the sake of time. So kind of summing up the self-regulation, our thought life has to be very disciplined when it comes to self-regulation. So if you sow a thought, you reap an action. If you sow an action, you reap a habit. If you sow a habit, you reap character. If you sow a character, you reap a destiny. So some of the self-regulation, some of the self-discipline comes into play if we're thinking the right thoughts, doing the right actions, and forming the right habits. Third thing that we're going to talk about with self is self-confidence. Effective leaders have to be self-confident. Self-confident people are less needy. Self-confident people are not threatened by other people's gifts and abilities. And why would that be the case? Well, because they understand that they themselves have their own gifts and abilities, and anyone else's success, anyone else's gifts and abilities is not, does not speak negatively about them. It has nothing to do with them. So they're able to celebrate that in others. John Maxwell has a great book, The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, and law numero uno talks about the law of the lid. And ineffective leaders have the law of the lid, meaning that on a scale of 1 to 10, if my effectiveness is at a 4, I can't let anyone else on my team under me be above a 4 because that's threatening to me. And that's what insecure leaders do. They tend to try to push down the accomplishments of others instead of celebrate them and utilize them. So self-aware, self-regulation leads to some self-confidence. If I am self-confident, then I can bravely face negative feedback and not let it define me. And if we had some time, and I would invite you to do this, is think about on your own, what are some sources of your self-confidence? Where did they come from? What kind of family origin did you come from? What are some early accomplishments that you look back and tell the stories over and over again? And for leaders, self-confidence leaders, they understand in their role, it's service before self. It's not about me. It's about the people that I'm leading. All right. I'm going to kind of move along here. We're going to talk about trust now. Number 2. The importance of trust for effective leaders. Self-awareness, self-regulation, self-confidence all leads to a point that says it's not about me, it's about you. I'm not going to make it about me. I'm not going to make it about my needs getting met. I'm here for you. What kind of barriers can I remove? What kind of situations can I put in place that are going to make my employees very effective? A team simply cannot function without trust. Trust is the confidence of your employees that they have no reason to be protective or careful around you. I love that definition. Trust is the confidence of your employees that they have no reason to be protective or careful around you. It's safe. Isn't that great? I love that definition. As a leader, how do you gain trust? I had one VP talk to her new managers, and she said, you know, if there's one thing I could tell you to do in these first 2 months, be consistent. Put your schedule up on your door. Every meeting, wherever you're going to be at throughout the day, put it on there, and then simply your job is to be there. Be wherever your schedule says you're going to be. That way your employees start understanding some consistency and they start building up some trust there. Act in a consistent manner. Be fair in decision-making. Others judge your actions, not your beliefs. You don't get credit for good intentions. So you can say, well, I meant to do those things. It doesn't matter. Others judge your actions, not your beliefs. You don't get credit for good intentions. And you have to communicate openly and frequently. And we could talk a lot about communicating and over-communicating the vision and the expectations for your group. Also being teachable. We talked about that with the self-awareness piece, understanding what it is that that you don't do great at. Understand that there's going to be some areas that you have some vulnerabilities, and invite people to help offset those deficits for you. I was working, one of the first internships that I got straight out of my master's work was with a guy that I'd worked with, a psychologist, and he was really top-notch, and he was partnering up to do some private practice stuff with 2 other great therapists, and so this is going to be great. I know Gary, he's just going to slide me right into this internship, and then at the interview, the other 2 asked me, 3-4 questions, but it was Gary, the guy that I knew that I'd worked with, that I had a great relationship with. It was Gary that kept hammering me with question after question after question, and finally he was asking me about some Jungian approach to schizophrenia, and I finally said, I don't know. I don't know. And there was this awkward pause in the conversation, and then he asked me one more question, and he said, well, what took you so long to admit it? And I didn't want to answer that question, and it was awkward, and the silence just stayed there for a while, and he said, Neil, we see a lot of potential in you. We think you're going to do some great things, and you're going to learn a lot. And we have a lot to teach you. But if you think you know it all right off the bat, I don't know how much you're going to let us in, how much you're going to let us in to teach you some of the things that you need to know. And I just want to. And so what Gary was doing is setting the tone right off the bat. I'm going to be your supervisor. You're going to be kind of an intern here, and you're in a position where you're going to have to do a lot of listening. And I tell managers and leaders that story because there's still part of it that they have to be authoritative, but there's still a part that they have to be teachable. They have to be open to other people's inputs, and when people are self-confident, they're much more able to hear some of those things where they need to grow. If you're willing to learn, observe, inquire, you will find that everyone has something to teach you, and there's a great technique that managers use called stop, start, and continue, especially when they're working with a group for the first time, checking in, doing some rounding, checking with their employees during the day. What is it that you want me to stop doing? What am I doing that's annoying you? Is there anything that I need to start doing? And what am I doing that you want to see me continue? It's just a great way to invite some of that feedback and to be teachable at the same time. Why is it hard to become teachable? Well, we don't like being vulnerable. And if you don't have a strong sense of self, a strong self-worth, you will equate needing to be taught as a personal deficiency, and that's just not the case. And in fact, the further we get into this information age, there's just no way any one individual can be an expert on a variety of topics. There's just too much information out there. So it isn't a personal deficiency if there's areas that you don't know or don't excel at. I like this quote from Leonardo DiCaprio that I found. I think it was in some newspaper article, but he said, there's a lot of pitfalls to success, and one of them is not listening to criticism. One of the most important things you can do is hear criticism of yourself and embrace it. And when your employees see you doing that, it's going to gain some trust. All right, ambitious. Third one, 5 essentials of effective leaders. Number 3, effective leaders are ambitious. Again, going back to our self-awareness, self-regulation, self-confidence. I know what I'm great at. Let's go conquer the world. And people with self-confidence have that. Ambitious people are internally motivated. They show strong initiative. They're very optimistic. They take them, you take them where they wouldn't go on their own. What I'm talking about there is sometimes leaders and managers and directors have to take employees to places that they wouldn't go on their own. But they can inspire others to work toward those aspirations, those visions. If you and Marcus Buckingham talks about this too. He said, you know what, I'm all for this servant leadership. That's some great stuff there. But there's something about working for someone who thinks that we can maybe accomplish more as a team than we have any reasonable way of actually considering that we can do that. But there's something about working for someone who's compelling and has some big, hairy, audacious goals there. They can also test this, like the marshmallow test. They can test people with some ambition. There's a ring toss test that they do. Even if you play skee-ball, they can tell that's a marker of your ambition. In fact, professional skee-ball players, and I didn't realize that there was such a thing until I until I took a look at this, they will spend, I think, maybe get 9 or 10 skee-balls. They'll spend the first 3 or 4 going for this 100. And if they don't get that, then they scale back and go for the 40, because that's the risk-reward ratio. That's the best place to go after that. But yeah, even all behavior is meaningful. So even how you play skee-ball will tell me something about your ambition. Ambitious people have sustained success, making the greatest possible impact over the longest period of time. And I've known a lot of people who've done that, and they're great to work with. Ambitious people have a realistic understanding of their strengths, weaknesses, and present challenges, but believe they have what it takes. They have the ego. They have the audacity to overcome these challenges and forge ahead. Again, understanding self-awareness is still the foundation for ambitious people because they understand strengths and weaknesses, and their self-confidence comes from there. They understand if you do not go after what you want, you'll never have it. If you do not ask, the answer will always be no. And if you do not step forward, you will always be in the same place. They're okay in taking some risks. Ambitious people will do that, and there will be some failures along the way, but they don't let that define them because they have some resiliency that goes along with that too. Number 4, in talking about the 5 essentials of effective leaders, number 4 is resiliency. Again, self-awareness, self-regulation, self-confidence. When I have those things, I can be resilient at the end of the day. What are some characteristics of resilient individuals? Resiliency is the ability to spring back from and successfully adapt to adversity. Resiliency is about who you are, while stress management is about what you do to handle the stress. Resiliency is about your character. It's about who you are in those challenging times. Resiliency is related to a person's overall growth and development, and resiliency is directly related to our self-concept and overall optimism. So you have to ask yourself, am I a resilient person? Well, what kind of core messages do you believe about yourself in success? What kind of core messages do you believe about yourself in failure? Can you take some credit for some of the success that you've had in your life? Can you say, you know what, it was because of my preparation. It was because of my perspiration, how much work I put into it. It was partly because of my creativity and my insights that I had. In failure, how much can you say, yeah, you know what, I got to own up to a few things there, but boy, you know, some circumstances could have happened that could have bounced it one way or the other. In fact, there was a story that I like to tell. We were going to hire an individual in my department, and we had 4 candidates. They were so-so. There weren't any superstars in there, but one that we felt, you know what, she's going to be a very solid contributor. And we were going to hire her. This was on a Thursday. On a Friday, our organization went through a hiring freeze. And the hiring freeze stayed in place for 6 months, and after that 6 months, we had to reopen the position again. Well, out of nowhere came these 2 superstars, and in fact, we ended up hiring them both, and we did not hire that original person. Now, we couldn't tell that individual any of this stuff. We just had to say, no, I'm sorry, you didn't get the job, but I always wanted to have a conversation with her. I always wanted to say, what did you tell yourself about not getting that job? Because it really had nothing to do with you. It was all outside circumstances. It was just simply bad luck that we went through that hiring freeze. Otherwise, we were going to hire you the very next day. And so sometimes we don't know some of those circumstances that are going on outside of our control, and we have to kind of chalk it up to that. We can't take anything away from that. She was a good candidate, but boy, that was just some bad luck with that situation. Resilient individuals see a setback as a result of factors that they have the power to do something about, not some flaw or some deficiency in themselves. It's not fatalistic. This isn't permanent. I can do something to improve this situation moving forward. I can improve my interviewing skills. I can follow up better. I can study how to be a better salesman, how to be a better leader. Resilient individuals can more readily make a realistic assessment of a setback, admit how they contributed to it. There's a story of 2 managers that both were up for a position, and neither of them got it, and one just exploded. He just went off and told off the boss, and really it was just a train wreck. I mean, he just went nuclear and burned a lot of bridges and did a lot of damage in that process. The other one was very disappointed in himself. And he wanted to do all those kind of things, but the second one, who handled it appropriately, had good self-regulation, took the high road, went home, talked to his wife about it, said, what can I do to improve this? And he had to admit, you know, there are some things that I can see where they would be hesitant. Requested a meeting with the director and saying, you know, this is when I did the self-evaluation, this is what I came up with. Can you tell me why, you know, what was your feedback? Why didn't I get this position? And they had a very productive conversation, and that person put himself in a great position to be hired for the next promotion that came up. 2 different examples, but 2 very different ways of how to handle that. Resilient individuals understand that happiness is not dependent on circumstances. It can be independent of our external surroundings there. There is up in Wisconsin, we've been having budget issues like most states have, and so the state said, you know what, all the professors across the state, we're going to have a 2-year furlough, meaning we're going to reduce your pay by 3%. And it's a temporary thing. It's going to only be for 2 years, but that's going to keep us from laying people off. Well, there was an article in the paper, and one person just exploded. We don't get paid enough the way it is, and this is ridiculous, and this is a slap in the face, and I can't stand it. Another one said, you know what, I'm not happy about it. I'm going to have to tighten the belt here a little bit, but you know what, a lot of my friends that I know don't have jobs. A lot of them are struggling. I feel very fortunate to be in the position that I'm in. Again, very, very different examples, and I would say that the second one was the more resilient individual. This is such an important thing that when they talk to insurance salesmen that have to make a lot of cold calls, they found at MetLife it was this ability, this emotional intelligence competency of being resilient that was the difference between those who were effective and those who weren't. Though there were some individuals that took it personally, that the rejection they took personally. Those that didn't said, well, they didn't want my product, okay, I'm going to go on to the next person, and very resilient in how they handled it. Some of our life's greatest achievements come through struggles, failures, and persistence. And I'm going to go through some of this because, I mean, the one thing I was talking about was his presidential approval rating. I think back in, well, it was when George Bush was in office, and there was one point where his approval rating was like at 29%. And if you think about that, 29%, if you showed up at your work, if you're part of a medium or a large organization, and only 29% of the people there said, yes, we think you're doing a good job, how difficult would that be? Now, I'm not saying one way or the other. I'm just saying people in leadership have to be resilient because they're going to take some knocks that, fair or unfair, they're going to have some criticisms of them, and they have to be able to handle that. All right, the last one, and we're heading down the home stretch here. We'll just do this in a couple minutes, and we'll wrap up here. But the last essential is sociological realities. Effective leaders understand that people are watching them. They are on a stage, and so everything you do is going to be monitored and criticized and evaluated. So that's some of the bad. But the good is that you have the ability to have a profound impact on your employees. In fact, that was another statistic from Marcus Buckingham's book. He said, you know, people don't leave organizations, they leave managers. And so if they've got a bad manager, they're going to leave that situation, not to put any more pressure on you as leaders. Effective leaders understand that they can no longer be an individual contributor. The trick is now that your role is to get the work done through other people. Again, going back to Buckingham, the one thing you need to know, the great managers need to know, is that they need to discover what is unique about each person and capitalize on it. Going back to personalities a little bit, we classically think of being, sometimes leaders are analytical, maybe cold, unfeeling. It's all about the bottom line. But research is saying we want someone who's interested in our development, who's interested in putting us in the most effective position that we can and having some conversations around that. So great leaders, great managers understand, and they discover what's unique about each person, and they capitalize on it. They understand that their actions speak louder than their words. Employees gauge their work ethic by your work ethic. They're watching when you come in and when you leave at night. You better believe it. And employees will constantly scrutinize the value and effectiveness of you and your role. So effective leaders understand the sociological realities. They can't take any shortcuts. You just can't. Too many eyeballs on you. You have to be, you have to have integrity in your work. They understand you have to be careful about what you put in writing because that's going to be open to interpretation. They keep their emotions in check, like we talked about earlier, and they maintain maneuverability. Sometimes employees ask very pointed questions that you may not be at liberty to say, and so they find ways to skirt around that. You know what? I'd love to address that issue, but just trust me on this. It's being talked about. It's going to be taken care of. I just can't tell you any more than that right now. So as we wrap this up, we talked about the 5 essentials of effective leaders. They have great self-awareness. They have great self-regulation, and they have self-confidence. They build trust with their employees, and they do that by number one, being vulnerable themselves and what their strengths and weaknesses are. these are also ambitious leaders. They want to tackle the world, and they understand themselves and they understand their team well enough to put people in place to make that happen. They're resilient. They're going to take some shots that are undeserved. They understand that, but they have the self-confidence and they have the support system in place to move forward with what is right. Not always what is easiest, but what is right. And finally, effective leaders understand the sociological realities of their role. Got a lot of eyeballs on them, and so they need to act accordingly to that. So really, really quick, we flew through that, went over a little bit in time there, but I'd love to hear from you if you have some questions or comments for me. Otherwise, I'll turn things back over to Marc here.
Thank you so much, Neil. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I know there's a lot of great content you cover for the people on the call, but I also know there's a lot that I can look at in my own organization, my own leadership style, and the things that I'm doing in my career and work life. So thank you for sharing today with us, and we really appreciate you spending the time with us today. Thank you, everybody, for attending today. Keep in mind we will have another speaker coming up next quarter, so be on the lookout for that. And I'm talking to people right now, coming up with some topics. If anyone has some specific ideas on what you would like for future webinars, please feel free to email me. I know most of you all have my email or received the newsletter, and I would certainly entertain those topics. And Neil, once again, thank you so much, and goodbye, everybody, and thank you for attending. That is the end of the webinar for today. Have a great day, everyone.